Absolutely.
There we go. We are live.
Hey, everyone,
Welcome back.
and Happy New Year.
Yes.
It's been a while. So I think we were last on in December, just before
Yeah.
the break. And it's been super busy because we got a lot of Quinly kits out in December. A lot of people, it landed on their doorstep middle of December to January. And we've been responding to questions and had lots and lots of coverage on social media. And so lots of comments too. Of
Yeah.
course, there's always
And
lots of comments
questions
online and
and
questions
feedback
and speculation.
and
Lots of
speculation.
speculation. So we thought, we just do a live stream addressing the comments and questions. And if you're on Twitch tonight, then please do use the chat function to ask us questions and join into the conversation. If you're watching this later, you can always join on our Discord community.
Yeah.
So, again, this is 3DQ, and we're going to be mostly responding to questions and comments about the Quinly automation for Ender 3s, but also we have a lot of comments about the vapor bed.
Yeah.
Everybody loves your vapor bed, and lots of speculation as to what it really is and how it works.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so let's start off. I think, we're going to go through a whole raft of questions,
Hmm.
but I'm thinking to kick things off, what we should do is just maybe you tell the folks kind of how you came up with the product in the first place and a little bit about your background, because it kind of gives some context, and then people kind of get an idea of, you know, what kind of brought you to this point of
Sure.
creating this.
Yeah, so I picked up 3D printing in high school. The first time I actually ever saw a 3D printer in person was in grade 8. And then from that moment on, I knew I had to have one. So it did take me about a year and a half of saving until I picked up my first one. But then as soon as I had one, I guess this would be now pretty much 5 years ago, maybe a bit longer. Um, everyone I knew I had one, and everyone I knew wanted me to print stuff for them. And
You were
so
the talk of the town,
the talk of yeah,
the local
the
town.
local town, the engineer wannabes at school, including myself. So yeah, and then I guess over the next couple of years of having my own printer, um, I found it sitting idle quite a bit of the time, and so I started asking people like, "Do you want stuff printed?" And people were coming to me wanting things printed, and eventually, throughout high school, I started like a tiny kind of side project manufacturing thing where I would essentially use the idle hours on my machine to do stuff for people and have them, buy me filament in exchange for that. And that quickly ended up growing to the point where I had demand that far outstripped my capacity. And that's when I started looking into how do I reduce the cycle time? How do I get rid of all this idle time? Like, because I was still in school, so the printer's sitting there idle. I think in my case it was pretty much 60% of the day because I could only start prints before school, when I got home, and then before I went to bed. And scheduling that to squeeze the most out of that time I wasn't there, it was kind of a nightmare. And then I started, looking into, okay, where's this time really being lost? And I came to the conclusion that it's when the printer is waiting for the operator to come and clear the parts. And so that was kind of the first piece of technology that went into Quinly was, okay, how do we automate the part clearing and bed prep and all that fun stuff. So
Well, and you were printing a range of different parts,
yes,
a really broad range. So, I mean, it's one thing if you're doing, cookie cutter or a panel or an enclosure over and over and over again.
yeah,
You can kind of optimize your printer and maybe get that a little more efficient. But when you're doing a broad range of parts, it's a lot more challenging.
yeah, and kind of what I've seen some people do, and I did try for myself at a time, is in certain circumstances, PLA on glass, you can knock the part off without too much force, but they tend to have to be really small parts. Um,
And not a lot of surface
Not a
area.
lot of surface contact. So that's kind of like when I started experimenting, it was with things like that, and it actually just getting that same part to loop over and over again was required a ton of tuning. So I had to develop like a cycle specifically for that one part, and I mean over time, as we now know, that's like really not scalable because if you have to do that for every single part you put in, and I would still have like inconsistent performance, like it's pretty much the same amount of time that you're sinking into it as the time that you would be saving by having the parts get knocked off. So as soon as I had to switch parts, like I was kind of at square one again, and then I'd have to look at like a different bed surface or I don't know, printing my part a different way. So the performance was super inconsistent, even though you could with some parts you could get it to
Kind of
kind of
do it.
lube, yeah.
Well, and then all of a sudden you'd switch materials,
Yes.
and that would be another
Yeah, so
whole
that
ball of
that
wax.
that like worked pretty much only with PLA, and then as soon as you want to do something PETG will sometimes magically like fuse to glass and other print surfaces. So it definitely didn't work with PETG, and ABS you can't do on glass. You usually need an adhesive for ABS that like is so sticky that then you can't knock it off afterwards unless it's a really small part again. So when I was starting to develop the automation, it's definitely like with the existing bed materials and like adhesives that you put on the bed, you could get I could get like some automation out of it, but it was very inconsistent and it always had to be tuned. Like I would always spend time tuning the cycle, and that was actually, like I said, and we realize now that was actually a massive time sink.
Yeah, and it's interesting how fast that time can go to the point where you don't really realize how much time you're
Yeah.
spending. We were talking to a 3D printing expert the other day who's in industry, and she was saying, she'll go down to her printer for 5 minutes and 3 hours later, kind of go, oh,
Yeah.
where did that
Like they
time
have to
go?
keep fixing things and yeah.
And tweaking
Yeah.
and certainly we found that even moving the printers from a prototyping system to a mass production system, because we do have 50 printers running. Our beds are actually 90 degrees as opposed to the Quinly.
Yeah, you can
um,
find photos of it online if you search up 3D,
QPod.
yeah, 3DQ, QPod, QPOD. That's actually what our production systems look like. But they run the same vapor beds.
Yes, and very similar software.
Yeah.
We just adapted it down to a single kit. So I think just with that little bit of background, a lot of people probably kind of resonates with them. They would have had similar experience with the printing
Yeah.
that you've had, and the similar frustrations. And of course, you do get the small wins, like, oh, this part works really well with glass, or
Yeah, and
this,
if I was only making that part, like
I'd be perfect,
it'd
I'd
be
be good.
perfectly
Yeah,
fine. Yeah.
exactly. And of course that's great if you do, especially if you could make some money off that, off Etsy or something. That's
Yeah.
fabulous. um but what we're focusing on is much more people who have to or want to do multiple parts, who want to be running the printers 24/7, and really want it to run more like a document printer, like a set it and forget it kind
Yeah.
of thing, where you select your files on your computer and the printer does its thing. Like
Yeah.
that's really what our goal is.
The yeah, the focus of the Quinly is that this is a automation solution that works for all parts. I'd like it to be all materials, but as many materials as we possibly can get it to work with, and also something that can be adapted to all types of printers or all types of print mods that you might already have on your machine. And and that is like, in my, at least in my opinion, is really the next step to the automation is you have like a one size fits all solution. Because I guess to your analogy of the document printer, it's as if switching to print like with yellow required you to retune the entire document printer, use a different type of paper for the ink to stick properly. Like Yeah, so like for example, something super common that I'm sure everyone can relate to is right now, you do pretty much always have to switch bed materials or the adhesive you apply when you switch your printing material.
Yeah.
So that's something that the Quinley eliminates too.
Yeah. And I think something that's important to point out, and then we'll get to the comments. Um, I think that because Quinley's a pretty new concept, it's not super clear yet to people that Quinley is literally like hiring an assistant.
Yeah,
Right? Quinly does run your printer for you. And so it's funny because some people are saying in the software, oh, it's, $8 a month, it's expensive. I don't think you could hire an assistant for $8 an hour,
yeah,
never mind a month. So, um, but the function of the software, and I know it because on video, of course, you're thinking, oh, the software is just clearing the bed, but really there's a lot more to it. And I
yeah.
think we should talk a bit about that later in the
Sure.
segment. Um, but if people can kind of keep in mind that the point of Quinly is more that this is literally like your little assistant that's running your printers for you,
Yeah.
right? So you don't have to run them anymore. That's really the point of the system.
Yeah. It's also good to keep in mind that hopefully it doesn't take a company like 2 years to develop a G code looper. So that's like
No, that's
another
it.
thing to keep in mind. There's actually a lot of stuff we'll talk about, how it works under the hood and things like that.
In the software.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there is quite a bit of difference between looping and what Quinly does. We actually had originally called it a print looping kit and realized that then it was getting confused with the Octoprint continuous print,
Yeah.
which is a great little program. Print looping is great, but again, not if you're trying to switch from from one part to the next
Hmm.
and that type of thing.
Yeah.
All right, so let's jump into some comments. So I think that the most common one we get, and we see it a lot on all of our social media, Instagram, Facebook. We got a great review by YouTube General and Honey Badger Print and Paint on YouTube. Those both were on YouTube. Number one comment we get: I wish the vapor bed was
Sold
separate.
separately.
It
Yeah.
was sold separately.
Yeah.
I don't have an Ender 3.
Yeah.
So, Mateo, maybe you want to talk a little bit about
Sure.
that. And
So,
maybe to talk a little bit about the properties of the vapor bed, what it was formulated for with the automation.
okay, yeah. So the vapor bed itself is specifically formulated for like best performance in automation, high cycle usage. And right now we're pretty much can only produce enough to fulfill the automation kits themselves.
True.
That being said, there is something in the works for those of you who are not so much interested in the automation, but are interested in the properties of the bed, such as being able to use pretty much any material with it, um, and having an easy time releasing without the need to use any sort of adhesives. So, um, I guess for now we'll say there's definitely something in the works for that we're hoping to announce soon. So if you do want to kind of be first in line, to get the first, I guess, tranche of beds that comes out, I'd suggest either follow our Instagram, I think is where we do most updates, and or also we have a mailing list on our website.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there
Yeah.
is something coming for all the people who want
Definitely.
the
Yeah.
great properties, but
Watch our
not the
social.
automation. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing is actually, I think would be great, even on this video will be on Twitch, but also be on YouTube.
Hmm.
And if you're watching it, uh, you know, just let us know what size of bed you'd be looking for. That
Right.
would be great. We have had direct inquiries for 400 by 400, for
Yeah.
300 by 300, for 500 by 500.
Yeah.
So we've had a number of people express interest, and we'd like to know, um, where the demand is, where people most would want the beds.
Yeah.
Um, so, do you want to talk a little bit about why, what's different about a bed that is created for automation as opposed to one that's created for for manual removal, and particularly a lot of the other beds out there. So one of the other frequent things is people say, "Oh, I have PEI, I have glass, I have
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera."
Yeah, I guess I can address that in two um, answers. The first one is the bed for automation, like kind of what I was talking about earlier, is it's really made to be able to handle any sort of situation, and it's a very high performance bed that's like tuned specifically for automation. So it's actually really hard to make. Um, and that gives you the pretty good adhesion at high temperatures, actually excellent adhesion with some materials like ABS and polycarbonate, and then the complete release when it's cool. Um, what's different about that and things like PEI and glass plates is the I kind of think of it as the domain of parts that you can automate with something like PEI or glass or even polypropylene um, is highly dependent on, or like the domain of geometries is different with those beds, and it's smaller than with the vapor bed. And so what I mean by that is um, there are, and there always will be, certain shapes and certain materials that those beds will give you the really nice release with.
Yeah.
Um, but even still, you'll sometimes get inconsistent performance. Like I, PETG is always the best example of this on pretty much any build plate. Sometimes it completely comes off, and you can print the exact same G code, and sometimes it'll just destroy the print surface and like not debond from the glass or the PEI. So um yeah, I guess that's what the difference is if in your experience you've had parts pop off of these standard beds, we're not saying that's impossible. Like that's actually kind of what inspired me to try to develop a better print surface. It's just that the vapor bed is engineered to give you that performance across a wide variety of parts. So like one of the I guess easiest examples to show people is with giant parts, right? So like this is a really flat part that was printed on one of our Ender 3s, and it's got this massive surface area. And with something like or with most beds out there, the higher your surface contact, the harder it is to remove. And so but with our beds, you can print these like really high surface area parts, and the removal experience is the same as with something like really small. For example, this part, the contact surface is literally only this sliver down here.
Yeah.
Um,
So we're printing these
yeah, like that.
like that, and yeah, and we print it on an angle.
We print them sideways.
And in fact, oh, we print them on the
These
coupon.
ones are printed
So we
sideways.
actually print these this way with
Yeah.
the, and this is the only connection
It's kind of
piece. So
ridiculous. I've posted a video in our Discord before, and people are like,
what?
what the heck is
We
going
could
on?"
put that up on Insta.
Yeah.
Yeah, people would probably find that interesting because it is really crazy that it's holding on by this one little thin
Yeah.
edge, especially
That's like the most
as
impressive part I think
as you get out here.
that we
Yeah,
make. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and the coolest part is too, like a lot of people talk I guess this is going back to address some of the comments. A lot of people ask about does the angle mess with really tall parts, and the answer is no. Like this is printed literally,
90
the
degrees.
bed is like this, it gets printed outwards, and all the angles are still square all the way down.
Yeah,
And the reason for it, if you want to get into it, is the amount of plastic you add on each layer that's actually molten is so thin and it's so viscous that by the time it cools, it's not going to move anywhere. The only issue you might have with squareness is if you're printing with like a really floppy material that starts to sag partway through. But
it's true. That's a good point. I mean, you might not want to do that with TPU or
yeah, but
yeah,
with PLA, it's
PLA.
actually
It's fine.
we haven't had any issues.
No, no, absolutely. Um, so one of the other things we get compared to the 3D print mill a lot, and of course, Creality's just come out with that, and Naomi Wu is um, did the launch on Kickstarter, I think, um, and of course, a belt printer is very different from putting a kit on your printer. I mean, you're buying a belt printer, it's an investment in either you want infinite print, which is a completely different function from what we offer because our beds don't move and we don't have a belt. So certainly if you're looking for an infinite print, really long parts, print mill or other belt printers are the way to go. But the other thing is on the continuous printing, I think that's where we get the overlap. People say, oh, well, I can do a loop on the belt printer and just, print the same part over and over. And I think there's kind of two parts to that that's interesting. One is with the print queue, um, we can print any number of different parts
Yeah.
in any order and any quantity. Again, like a document printer, I can have 2 pages of a flyer and then 100 pages of a song sheet, and then it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a difference from the belt printer. But the other thing is that you are whatever performance you're getting out of your ender, now you will get that out of your ender with Quinly, because Quinly again is this assistant that runs your printer. It
Yeah.
doesn't replace anything about your printer. So if you're loving the parts you're getting off your Ender 3 and you've dialed it in, we
Yeah,
don't
you don't have to change any settings really.
no.
Which I think,
Well, unless maybe you're compensating for adhesion issues and printing extra rafts and stuff, then you can get
yeah,
rid of
you can
that.
get rid of some, yeah, you can get rid of some helpers actually,
Yeah.
in some cases. But yeah, it's important to know like, um, because this is still the printer you've always been working on, um, you don't have to worry about um reslicing all of your models for a different type of printing. Like even if you get like an A net and an ender, the G code you'll give to them for the best parts is going to be different. But with something like the ender compared to a belt printer, um, you have to completely rethink how you'll be doing slicing. So for those of you who've already got like a production system kind of going and you've got all your parts styled in, and all you do is want to add automation to it, that's kind of what Quinly is for, is you keep your printer, you keep your settings, you don't have to buy a new printer, and you can get going really, really quickly.
Well, it's also for the folks for whom the printer is a tool for their hobby. So when we met the folks at Honey Badger Print and Paint, they don't make money from their printing. They want to make prints that they paint.
Yeah,
That's the point. And so they don't want to be fiddling with the printer.
yeah,
They do they do miniatures, they do prints. Some of their parts have all kinds of different components,
yeah, like hundreds of pieces and
hundreds of pieces,
giant
and they don't want to be
assemblies.
running to the printers.
Yeah,
They had one they were telling us about, I think it was 4,000 hours of printing, and if they'd had Quinly, it would have taken
yeah, a
so
couple
much less
weeks, I
time.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we can do 1,000 parts easily in 5 days. So
There's a comment here. Hi, is there a risk to damage the bed while calibrating the nozzle distance? How resistant is the bed material to avoid any damage with the nozzle?
that's a really, really good
That's a
question.
good question. So the bed performance will be affected if you scratch or damage it with the nozzle. So when in our instructions and in the kit, there are a whole bunch of, there's a method for calibrating the print bed so that you can avoid any sort of damage to it. And there's also a whole bunch of warnings and tips on how you can avoid damaging it. And the cool thing about automation is once you've got your Quinly set up, and we recommend using auto leveling with it, you can pretty much let it go for like days or weeks. Like sometimes you don't even really have to calibrate it unless you're doing something crazy on it. So the risk of damaging the bed is quite low if you tune it up correctly once you put it together. Um, the nice thing about how we do automation is because there's almost no force involved. Like we're not punching parts off, right? The point of the bed release is that in some cases the parts literally roll off on their own when it releases. So you're not getting force on your bed that could potentially decalibrate it. So we found that even with like a printer like the Ender 3, um, which is made out of like low cost components, it can stay in calibration for a very, very long time.
Yeah. But I think it is a good point. The bed is a bit uh, fragile in the sense of that any kind of scraping, it is a touch-free bed.
Yeah.
So if you're used to using a scraper on your bed,
Don't
you gotta,
scrape.
yeah, self-control. Keep your hands away from the scraper. I was joking when we were first trying to explain the warnings. You know how we were going to articulate the warnings on the bed. I said, well, the vapor bed is your baby. You wouldn't use a scraper and you wouldn't
Yeah.
use acetone on your baby, so don't use it on the
Yeah, don't use
vapor
it on the
bed.
baby. Or your assistant. If Quinley's your assistant, please don't pour acetone on your assistant.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's a really good question, and it's actually we have warnings all over our instructions.
Hmm.
I actually got chided this week by email, like, why do you say so many
Yeah.
times?
But it's been good because people haven't been damaging their beds, so it
No,
actually works.
and that was the interesting thing with going through the beta is
Yeah.
we had, of our 8 beta reviewers, 2 of them damaged their beds almost right away.
Hmm.
Then we put out all these warnings, and out of the next 100 kits, I think we only got one.
Yeah.
So people start, oh, I have to think differently.
It is a little in your face, but
It
it
is.
does work. Then the follow-up question to that was, do you recommend BL Touch sensor to avoid that? Yeah, definitely. We run auto leveling on all our machines. We use an inductive probe, but a lot of our customers use the BL
BL
Touch,
Touch.
and so far they seem to,
Really like it.
yeah, they don't perform much differently. They work pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh,
Well,
did you have another?
yeah, we'll talk about the software and Octoprint at the end, I think once we get through these questions,
Yeah,
because it is a very common
it
question.
is a very common question, and and it's a good question
Hmm.
because of course lots and lots of folks have Octoprint for a whole bunch of things, and they
Yeah,
got tons of plugins.
yeah.
Um, so it's certainly something that we're constantly discussing, and we'll talk about more. Um, so I'm just looking at um,
Yeah, something most of the comments are asking,
the same thing
what's
over.
the bed made of, or
What's
can we get it separate?
or guesses?
Or
We get lots
guesses.
of guesses
Yeah,
of what the bed. It's interesting. A number of people will say, "Oh, it's definitely this bed or that bed," and it's quite funny because we enjoy watching the interplay on social because someone else will go, "Well, how do you know that? Do you have one?"
yeah.
uh, so so the interesting thing is that uh, we have used the bed now on um, and Quinly, but the bed in particular on a variety of materials,
Hmm.
including some high heat materials. And we do get questions quite often, like this one, which says, Can the Ender 3V2 be upgraded to print at 350 degrees C? So the first thing is, can our bed work at 350 degrees C? And the second thing is, how do you upgrade your Ender? So you want to talk about
Sure.
that?
So yeah, I guess in terms of the bed temperature, the highest we've run it is 135 degrees C, and this was on an Ender. This is actually on an Ender 3 that one of the engineers had modified with uh, insulation underneath to keep the heat in the bed, and that let us print higher temp materials. I think the hottest thing we printed was nylon at like 280 degrees C, and that was just with the E3D V6 hot end. Um, I've seen people run like really high temp hot ends on the Ender 3V2, so I think it's definitely possible. In terms of the bed itself, we recommend so far this is not a hard limit, but we recommend not to go over 200 degrees C on the build surface. Um, Mainly because we kind of don't know what will happen. We don't have a printer that can go that hot, and I think printers rarely ever go up to that temperature. Um, But printing really hot materials onto the print surface is generally fine. I don't think we've had too many issues with it.
No.
I'm trying to think of one. I did cause a bit of damage to the bed when I was testing, so it wasn't hooked up to the software, and I left the nozzle touching the bed, and the nozzle was at like 280.
Uh-oh.
That did cause like it left a dot. I don't know.
User error.
Yeah, user error for
That
sure.
and that's actually something else we'll talk about the software at the end,
Yeah,
why it's so important with the automated bed and how it protects your bed,
yeah.
because there's a number of things you've written in there to do that. Um, one of the interesting things that does come up as well is are there mods that can help you, for instance, cool the bed faster and that type of thing. And I don't think I don't think we'll have time to address them tonight, but next week
Yeah.
we will be talking about mods for the Ender 3, and particularly what we found works in our system. I'm sure they're portable across different systems. We've done some nice things with bed insulation and some
Throwing a fan to
cooling fans
cool
and
down the bed. Yeah, Kevin's gonna talk about that all next week on stream. And speaking of mods, Sergio asks, he's working on an Ender with the IDEX setup. It should work fine. It might be good join our Discord and just post the exact setup you're using so that some of the staff can take a look, and then we can give you a more concrete answer. But so far, none of people's mods have really interfered with it, as far as I can tell. So
yeah, and we're always happy to try out
yeah, if
new
it does,
combinations.
yeah,
Yeah.
as you know, if it does interfere, then Dominic's gonna be up at 11 creating new firmware for you, so that we can get it working quickly.
Yep, and he loves doing it too.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the interesting things that people bring up quite often is that oh, it's what's the surface coating? Is it is this like a tacky surface bed, that kind of thing? And of course there's a lot of comments around, well, I just use hairspray, or I use school glue, or I use whatever with my bed.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's hard to show this on video, although we do have some videos up on social, uh,
On the Instagram.
on the Instagram showing the part release. But maybe you want to talk about this concept of like the tacky surface and stuff, because we don't have a tacky surface.
No, it's not tacky. Um, Let me think how I can explain this. When it's hot, plastic will just stick very well to it. But the surface itself, like if you tap it while it's hot, it's still a solid surface. Um, and there's no sort of residue or potentially like delicate things that might come off into your prints or wear down while you print. Like one of the really popular surfaces out there is called the Ultra Base, which
Yeah.
is a glass surface that has these ceramic dots coating it. It kind of looks like the top of a windshield, and it's made the same way. But um, that works really well because it provides a very rough surface for the print to stick to, and then when the glass shrinks, um, a lot of prints are able to release quite easily. The problem is with a mechanical adhesion system like that, it tends to wear out over time. And so with our bed and the material design we've basically avoided doing anything like that. So it doesn't wear with repeated usage. And it's not tacky, it's like solid.
Yeah, yeah, no, the adhesion is completely different
Yeah.
mechanism. So one of the interesting, I remember we got this comment actually early on after Print General posted the video, was, you lose print volume because how do you print at the back of the plate?
Hmm.
And I thought that was actually really an interesting observation, but also I know you have a bit of an answer for that one.
Yeah, so there, because the nozzle has to go all the way to the bottom to eject, there's like a chance that you might lose some print volume in very specific cases. but there are also ways to work around that very easily. Um, just by using a different reset path, you can customize. Yeah, you can set something up that works with the the part layout you have, and we do have something kind of in our software backlog that will actually look at your models and sort of decide what the best way to move the nozzle to knock them off is. So right now, I would say it's like a temporary issue that will probably affect less than 1% of your parts, and then eventually,
That won't be an issue
yeah, it won't
anymore.
be an issue. It's definitely something we've noticed and is in the works.
Yeah. And we've got new features coming out all the time. We've had, since the reviewers started in the early December, I think we're on our third release, with
Yes.
fixes and with new
Third public
features.
release, 200th internal build. Like,
200 builds,
yeah,
yeah. So people are wondering where the $8 a month goes.
yeah, it
That's
goes
where
into,
that goes into new features and bug fixes,
yeah,
like most software.
yeah.
So, so interesting. Somebody, I think they were being funny. They were saying, "Oh, next printing upside down," but in fact, you've printed upside down with this.
I tried once and all the like strings and stuff fall back into your hot end, so it's not a good idea. I would not recommend. Though if you
But the
want,
bed can handle it.
the bed can handle it, and if you want, if you really want to, you can modify the brackets and set up your printers upside down just because it looks cool.
Oh, you should do that just for fun.
Maybe on April 1st, like the guy suggests.
Yeah, he said April 1st already. That's a good
You
idea.
could do like a fake product launch.
That would be funny.
Okay.
Uh-oh, you've all had a preview
Yeah,
now.
you
You're
guys
gonna
will
know.
know.
Um, One of the common questions we get is, does the incline stress the y-axis motor? Um, and also we get similar questions about, are we going to burn it out by hitting the part off? So you want to talk about those
Yeah, of
two?
course. That it does just because it's on an incline, it does put a little bit of requires a bit of extra work from the y-axis. However, um, you'll only notice if you're like pushing your ender to pretty insane speeds, like beyond normal print speeds. So if you're like trying to print at like 150 millimeters per second plus, that's when you'll probably start to see it. Um, However, for normal printing, you won't notice it. And then for pushing the parts off with the y-axis, the release is so gentle. It's as if the part is just sitting on the print bed, like as if you just put it there. So when we use the axis to push it off, and this is why we don't have a special scraper, sweeper, or anything on the ender, it's because it's just sitting there by the force of friction. It's literally like it's this kind of same amount of force as me just pushing it off, and the incline also helps with that. So
Yeah, it will be like gravity to do its piece.
yeah, that's part of the incline. Gravity helps with that quite a or guide the part quite a bit.
And that's part of the issue with the formulation for automation, is that it needed to be sensitive enough that gravity was a part of the release.
Yeah,
In fact, for those of you who are following us on Instagram, if you go back to New Year's, you'll see a countdown, and some of the numbers just decided to
yeah,
release
leave on their own.
themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it was very cute. Uh,
just to not to ignore the chat.
oh yes,
Yeah, we addressed the selling the bed separately. Just I'd recommend you watch this when it goes up on YouTube, but just stay tuned. We'll have something to announce pretty soon.
that's
Yeah,
yeah, that's
that's a
that's all
short.
you're allowed to say.
That's a short
That's
answer.
a short answer. Exactly. I just love this comment. This isn't really a question, but it says, it it most part for the most part it takes an Ender 3 and Naomi moves the 3D print mill, and they have a child named Quinly.
Yeah, it's pretty
It's
funny.
kind of
It
true.
is. It's like a lower cost print mill that uses an Ender 3. It's got ideas from both.
Yeah, well, and the whole point is it's a kit that upgrades your Ender 3
Yeah.
to an automated. Well, a lot of people are starting to build print farms with Ender 3s.
Yeah.
They find it's easy to mod. They find, it's a good solid base.
Hmm.
And so once you've got a print mill you got 10 or 15 or 20 printers, you do not want to be reapplying adhesive and
No.
scraping and running back and forth, even if you're looping. Um, when you start adding up the labor time every month, just even if you're touching each printer 5 minutes a day, you
Yeah.
got 20 or 30 of those, it starts taking up a lot of time. Another common question: does it work with Ender 3 Pro and
Yes.
V2? And the answer
Yeah.
is yes.
So all we will support all variations of the Ender 3. Um, including looking at some of the crazier mods you can do, but all stock variations, the what is it? There's the Ender 3, and there are a whole bunch of like different ones throughout the ages that it's been released. The V2, the Pro, there's like an Ender 3S, I think, as well, that we support too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, so I think we got some more
Yeah.
questions over there. Did you want
Cool ideas. Cool ideas. Oh, that's just Steven. Yeah,
to? All right.
that's our Steven
All right,
responding.
Stephen. Stephen, shout out to Stephen because he has been with us now a year.
Just over a
He
year,
just,
yeah.
yeah, he just finished his 1 year anniversary, and we're only 2 years old, so
Wow.
that's pretty good.
That's pretty cool, yeah.
And he's done a lot of the hardware. So if you guys have any questions that are too much for us to answer on this, Steven's obviously on the chat, so he
Yeah.
can help you out too.
And in the Discord.
Um, another thing that we get questions about is the Pi.
Yeah.
Why do you need a Pi 4? Can I get it without the Pi 4? Maybe you can talk a little bit about, well, for the folks who don't use Pi right now, why do we need it on an Ender? And then specifically, kind of what's the deal with a Pi 4, and
Sure.
talk a little bit about that.
Um, so you if you've never used a Pi 4 before, we have a kit that's kind of set up for you on our site, but honestly, I would recommend that people kind of source the parts themselves, and we do provide like very detailed instructions and live support for those of you who kind of got your own Pi 4 and want to have it running on that. The reason we use the Pi 4, at least for now, is that it gives us a lot of headroom when building updates. That being said, like we are kind of looking into running on lower powered devices in the future. In fact, some of our people have actually gotten it to run fine on a Pi 3B plus.
Nice.
And this latest update that's coming out is um, kind of a first step towards reducing the resource usage of the software.
That means you can just attach more things though.
Yes, yeah,
Because
that's
you're
part of
never
the
gonna
reason.
you're never gonna waste your computing power,
Yeah,
right?
like we gotta reduce our RAM usage to get something like a camera going and all that fun stuff. So that's the Pi 4 will give you ultimate flexibility. Maybe down the road, if we do offer support for a lower powered Pi, you might have to switch off certain features and stuff like that. So kind of when we're building this, we're trying to build it with utmost flexibility in mind with the software.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of people always ask us about ABS, ASA. Do you want to go through maybe a sort of an overview of the
Sure.
materials that,
Yeah.
because we haven't really said specifically what materials we've tested, and we have done actual material testing. So,
Yeah. So PLA is what we print here with the most, and what I think most people print with. PLA works perfect on it. Um, ABS actually works surprisingly well. It tends to stick, like the adhesion roof, I guess, is higher than the PLA, which is really cool in my opinion because there are like no good solutions for printing ABS in open air. Um, and like, yeah, recently I actually at home I have a few rolls of ABS. So PLA ABS work. We've done a bunch of testing with PETG, and actually a bunch of our customers use PETG. We've only found this one brand that doesn't work, and we're not sure why, but everyone else, like the 3D Print General included, has had really good success with the different types of PETG they've used. So
yeah.
I guess yeah, we just found out of all the stuff being tested, we found this one that's not great. Um,
But part of the challenge with filaments is that the material science is progressing at just is galloping
yeah,
forward,
it's insane.
and they keep changing ingredients. And this, whenever you change the ingredients in your plastic, it's going to change performance, obviously. And everybody who's tried different materials knows this. It's going to change performance on your printer, and it certainly does with our print bed. So
Yeah,
we try to keep people as up to date as we can be, but we're also going to be starting to log our user experiences with different
yeah,
materials so we can give people some idea of what people have found works and doesn't work and what they find consistent.
yeah,
One of the issues is because we're trying to do high volume automation, like we really believe distributed manufacturing is the future. We think the pandemic was the perfect
kick in the pants
kick in the
for,
pants that we know, you can't have
yeah,
everything in one place. It's much more environmentally sound. You can use a lot more plant-based plastics.
yeah,
You're going into the circular economy, and you can make to order. So you're not producing a whole bunch of stuff where half of it's getting thrown out because there's no market demand.
yeah,
So, this is the driver from our side in terms of creating this technology. And if you're going to automate for production, you have to be able to consistently produce results. So, that's what drives a lot of our development. I think
yeah.
you've got some new
Yeah, I've got some
comments.
questions and I'll go back to the filament list that we've tested. So the first one was someone I spoke to during the Schulich job fair asking about the cooling time and whether there's been any updates on that. Next week, Kevin is going to talk about some mods for cooling that you can do, and I think he's made a video
Yeah,
already that's
it's
going to go up.
it's very good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, okay.
yeah, I like it.
Um,
Even I could follow
Perfect.
it.
That's how you know it's good.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, so but it's a fan, and I think I don't know about this latest iteration, but his previous one reduced the print time by about 40 or the cooling time by about 40%. So we are looking at that, and there's all sorts of like very experimental stuff we've been thinking about with like water cooling the print surface if that's required. But I think
And we've had users come back and say, "Oh, I've been in aerospace. You should try this. You
yeah.
should try that."
So
We'd love to have a lab where we could try that.
there's a lot of ideas being kind of thrown around and worked on.
Well, and one of the points with the cooling, and it does come up in the comments uh, reasonably often, is, gee, what if I'm in a hot location and I can't get down to the 26 degrees to release the parts? So
Mhm.
you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so in this next update, which we'll talk about, which is actually coming out tomorrow, we've raised the cooling floor to 29 degrees because that's been working with almost everyone. And then what we'll do in the following one is you'll just be able to set it yourself per material. And so if you have something like a nylon that will release at, 55 degrees C, you can set that and save yourself the time waiting for it to cool all the way. So yeah, it is in the works. I think our focus out the gate has been just getting the cycling to work and the automation to work, and that already gives you so much improvement that saving like 10 or 15 minutes on a cooling time is marginal compared to that. But now that people actually have it in their hands and are running it,
Now that we have it,
and
we
we've
want to
got
cut
it.
down our
Yeah,
cycle
yeah, we
time.
want to cut down the cycle time quite a bit. So it is kind of next priority after the consistent and reliable automation.
Yeah, because one of the interesting side effects of the pandemic, and I'm sure there's a number of people out in our audience, and I know in our customer base who experienced this, the demand for 3D printed products suddenly shot through the roof. So
Yeah,
we already had a number of printers. I think we had a dozen or more. We're now over 50, and we do print parts for local companies,
yeah,
and of course, our goal is, sure, we'll print you some parts, and then when you've got the volumes, let's
yeah. Go get some kits.
let's set you up with Quinly and an ender, and you guys can produce your own, because again, the on demand just makes so much sense to us. But we have learned a lot about the psychology of people as they ramp up, because as we ramped up, we started going, well, it's great to have the automation, but now we want faster cycling time. Now we want faster print time. Now we want, because you're constantly wanting to kind of get to that next level. So it's been an interesting learning curve.
Hmm. Um, the question about reducing print speed, you don't necessarily have to reduce it. You will have to sometimes change it, but also the Quinly software actually takes care of a lot of that for you, the first layer settings. So,
And maybe this is a good time to talk a little bit
sure.
about the software because
Yeah.
I think, you know, again, on video, it's kind of hard to understand how smart it is and how much it does for you. And I
Yeah.
also think, as a printer operator, because I work with a lot of you guys, you don't realize how much time you spend optimizing for adhesion and release,
Yeah.
not just for printing, but for the
Just in
actual,
general.
just the adhesion and release
Yeah.
portion. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it's not very visible, but whenever you upload a G code file to Quinly, there is this step between the upload and the actual being able to submit it to the queue where it goes through the entire G code file and pre-processes it to make it work with the automation. And that includes like it'll look at stuff, it'll strip out G code that might interfere with the automation, like weird start G code we've had sometimes cause problems. And it will add G code in certain places just to make it better. And it will look at stuff like it'll change temperatures. Sometimes we'll disable fan for certain things. And just like basically goes through and looks at your entire file and makes it ready to run on Quinly is kind of the short of it.
Well, it is your assistant.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
what
your
should your
assistant.
assistant be doing? Should be your assistant should be looking at your G code, looking at your part, and saying, "How do I make this more efficient?"
Yeah,
And that's really what Quinly does.
yeah,
Not at the level we'd like it to do.
not yet.
It's going
Soon.
to, yeah, it's going to be a
There's
lot more
a lot more cool things
coming.
in the pipeline. Yeah, and so there's a specific place I was going with that. Oh yeah. So yeah, the reason the software is so complex under the hood and the reason it took us so long to develop it is um or this portion of it is because uh kind of as I said at the beginning, you have to account for so many dimensions of variability in what's going to get thrown at your printer. So not only is there and this is why the bed and the software are so closely linked to each other, but not only is there um, you have to consider material, you have to consider that even different colors of PLA will behave differently, or different batches made on different dates will behave differently. You need to consider that you can throw G code can take the form of any shape. Like it can be something like this or something like this or something crazy like this. And it needs to be able to work with the automation. And the printer itself could be in different states of wear and tear or have different mods applied to it. And so Quinly needs to be able to work with that. And there are all these like considerations that you as an operator might have built up an intuition for over years that Quinly now has to make. And that does offload a lot of work on your plate because you don't have to spend as much time optimizing for the automation. Going back to when I was just doing a very simple loop with like looping G code, um, I had to tune that specifically to the type of part I was running and the type of bed I was running it on and the type of material it was. With Quinly, you can pretty much throw any G code into it and it'll be able to run it. Um, so yeah, that there's a lot of stuff that kind of happens under the hood that you don't really see in the UI, but it kind of makes the user experience very easy once you set it up.
And I think you're making an important point because uh, part of what we've spent a great deal of time doing is that we aren't going to stop at the ender.
Yeah.
First of all, Creality has lots of other great products. And secondly, there's a couple of little companies out there. I don't know, Prusa and Ultimaker
Yeah.
and
Tiny.
tiny ones. Yeah. No, but there's a broad range of printers. And if you think about if you as an operator went from one printer to another, just that learning curve,
Yeah.
that being able to adapt to the different machine, the different standard features,
Hmm.
dual nozzle, different bed leveling, that type of thing. Um, the, the software has to be able to do that without anyone telling it how to do
Yeah.
that. And so, um, print looping software gets rid of all that variability because it just stacks G code is basically how it's been
Yeah.
described to me.
It's kind of like baked in, basically. All your stuff is baked in, and that makes it very difficult to adjust for any sort of change over time. And
But it works really well for looping.
it works really well for looping
Yeah,
the same part over and over again, or parts that are kind of similar.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
But
totally.
not doing a broad range in a
Yeah.
queue where you've got a whole bunch of different users coming in and putting in
And
different
honestly, a
things.
lot of people don't want to have to deal with that variability,
No,
including myself. And I know everyone knows how painful it can be to slice certain models. So, uh, imagine having to do that again to get automation to work. That would just be awful.
yeah,
So,
you don't want to do that. You don't want to
yeah,
redo your work. You've already done it.
yeah,
Um, and then I wanted to do one more thing because I see we're sort of running out of time. Although if there's still questions, we'll probably go over time.
hmm
But I do like this question about printing on an angle and this particular person said, well, gravity will cause deformation of the plastic, especially printing larger pieces with thin walls. Um, but he thinks that tilted surface is a real no-no. We obviously produce literally tens of thousands of industrial parts on our 90-degree beds, and our increasingly our Quinleys. But maybe you want to talk about what our observation has been in working with tilted surfaces. And
sure. Um, Short of it is you actually can't really tell whether a part has been printed on a tilted surface or a straight up surface. It might be interesting, like if the pandemic is over, to do a
if it ever
video,
ends.
if it ever, yes, if it's over, if it ever ends, to do like a blind test at a trade show or something.
Oh, it would be
That would be
great.
a cool video,
Which
actually.
angle
Yeah,
printer was this printed on? Oh, that's a good
like
idea.
this, I bet this part would throw people off because
Yeah,
the fact that it prints like this
yeah,
will
people would
I
say
think
no.
blow them away. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, the short is you almost can't tell. It's within the tolerance of the machine. Like this was printed sideways. It's actually half the print, but um, it had come out this way. I think the only time we've ever gotten curved prints was actually when one of the belts were loose, and it was actually due to the machine and not to the plastic sagging. Because again, how much how much can point like 0.2 millimeters of plastic really flow before it cools down and solidifies?
Not much.
Not much.
No, we found not much.
Yeah.
That we get very little
Yeah.
issue with that. So I think our time is up, and as I say, we're more than happy to continue to answer questions if there's questions on the chat. And you can always reach out to us, info@3DQ. And also, we are on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and I'm Steph Sharp. This is Mateo Pekic, and you can connect with us on social. The other thing is we have a community Discord channel.
Yes.
If you're on Discord, come and join us. There's a whole bunch of folks there that know a whole bunch about all different kinds of printing. So, a great place to get your questions answered or just start a discussion.
Cool.
Yeah, great.
All right. I'll need the mouse to turn off the stream. Thanks again, guys. Hope to talk to you in the Discord soon, and we'll see you next week with
Mods.
mods for the Ender 3. All
Yeah.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye.